Sleep has been impossible for the last few weeks. At first, I blamed the moon, and when the moon changed, I blamed Mercury. But now Mercury has come and gone too, so maybe it's just me. After this many nights without sleep, I knew that hallucinations are not far behind, so I've started taking long, directionless drives in the dead of night, just to keep the nightmares at bay. I don't aim for anywhere in particular, just to cruise the desolate roads by the docks and old factory buildings in the shabbier parts of town. All that matters is I outrace the horrors inside of my own head. So far, it's been working. Last Monday, though, something strange happened. It was the darkest time of night, sometime between 2 and 3, when even the ghosts are afraid to go out. But that didn't stop me. I was rolling along slowly down a street that I had traveled many times before. It runs parallel to an old cannery, a long imposing monolith of crumbling brick, tiny windows near the top scabbed over by years of decay. I reached a busted traffic light swinging in the sea breeze. Ahead of me stretched endless rows of boarded up tenements. To my right and left, only darkness. On a whim, I took a coin out of my pocket, flipped it. Heads for right, tails for left, and allowed chance to take the wheel. I continued driving, past vacant lots full of skeletal cars long ago stripped for parts, past empty warehouses that had lost the word of the night and been swallowed half up by shadow, down streets that no one had ever given a name. Every time I reached an intersection, I flipped the coin, right and then left and then right. I surrendered myself to blind chance until I had lost all sense of direction and found myself in places that I had never seen before. A strange second city hidden inside the shadow of the first. At last, I had reached a dead end. No more turns to take. This is my destination, then I thought. I reached for my car door, and I prepared to exit into the night. But as I began to open the door, I paused. I wondered, where had the coin toss taken me? What was waiting for me outside the safety of the car? And did I dare find out? On another night, perhaps, I would have answered no and driven straight home. But these sleepless have no use for home, and little fear of death. I knew what hallucinations awaited me if I turned back and gave in to my insomnia. The tall, smiling man with his long, wet fingers, the scarlet-skinned lady with her inside-out face, and so many other nameless grotesques who would yearn to illuminate me with their torments. A throbbing lump coiled in my gut told me that these old familiar faces were close. And so, more ready to brave the unknown than to submit to those well-known horrors, I left the car behind and I vanished into the dark. The coin toss had led me to an old canal, dredged up years ago and now bone dry. A chain-link fence restricted access only in theory. I quickly found a man-sized hole to slide through, and descended a set of iron rungs down into the bare cement channel. I looked up and down the seemingly endless canal, seeing only darkness in both directions. I did not hesitate for long though. The visions I was running from were close behind me, and it was only down here that I could escape from them. I knew this in my bones. And so I walked on and on through those colossal veins that carried blood no more. Guided less by the dim moonlight than by the things that nipped at my feet, threatening to burst forth through my skull if I slowed down or stopped to look back. I walked until my feet blistered, and then I kept on walking more, never stopping, never pausing, ever following the path that emerged before my eyes and vanished behind my footsteps. Half real, like a momentary illusion of form in a ribbon of smoke. There was no real form here though, only emptiness. My heartbeat echoed before me as I went headfirst into the emptiness, all alone, until I reached a dead end. A place where the canal widened on all sides into what must have once been a lake. There was no water anymore though, only a parched basin, here and there scattered with rocks, dust, skeletons of fish, old nails, broken bottles, overturned oil drums, the cold remnants of campfires. I kicked at one of them, scattering ash and charcoal. As soon as I did so, I realized that I was no longer alone. There was a faint glow a few yards ahead of me, a pale fire that I had not noticed at first amidst the gray gloom that shrouded the once lake. A group of men was huddled around the dismal flame, maybe 24 in total. I got very close before they even looked up at me, so transfixed were they by the warm, seductive dance of the flames. I noticed one last thing as I drew close to them. Lying on the ground, several feet away from the rest of the party, was a large heap, perhaps a pile of laundry or old rags, covered in a white sheet. None of them paid it the slightest attention, but in a way they seemed very deliberate, as if they were very purposefully not looking at it. I stopped as I reached the edge of their circle, and I cleared my throat. They turned to look up at me, and their dazed, almost trance-like stares transformed into bright, chipper smiles. The man closest to me, a fat, bald, bewhiskered black man wearing a brown coat, stood and greeted me. "Welcome, stranger," he said, opening his arms for an embrace, or at least a very enthusiastic handshake. I opted for the latter, but kept my distance. If my jolly greeter noticed my coldness, he didn't seem to mind. "Pull up a seat, warm your toes, slake your thirst. You've come just in time. William, pour our newcomer a little of that glug." A mug of something warm and sweet-smelling made its way around the fire and into my hands. I tried to turn it away, but my hosts were insistent. Before I knew it, I was sitting on an upturned bucket, and biting the hot, steamy glug, and listening to a round of introductions. My portly new friend gave his own name last. "And of course, I'm Jack. Jack be nimble, Jack be quick. Jack's eaten too much and grown quite thick." He laughed deeply at his little rhyme, but I saw the others smirk and roll their eyes. An old line, no doubt. He went on. "None of the other fellows talk as much as me, which makes me the leader here de facto." "Nobody talks as much as you, Jack," protested an old, stooped-over man with wrinkled-up skin. "And I don't remember voting for no leader." "That may be true, Cornelius, that may be true. But then again, none of you gentlemen would be here if I hadn't come around first, now would you? This delightful tapestry of camaraderie would be nothing more than a tangle of threads if I hadn't stitched us all together, I do believe. So forgive me for tooting my own horn just a little bit." Cornelius grunted. "As long as that's the only thing you're tooting," he said. The men laughed long and hard at this one, none more so than Jack himself. I chuckled a little myself, I'll admit, and I settled into my seat. The fire was quite nice, humble as it may have seemed at first, and it warmed my chilled bones. The glug was even nicer. I took another deep swallow and felt it toast me from my fingertips to my toes. I let out a loud, satisfied belch, and the men gave me a cheer. "A man after our own heart," cried out Jack. "Pray tell, my friend, what brings you to our little society tonight? It's not unheard of us to have visitors, but it's always an occasion worth noting." I thought about how to answer this question. All of the lies I could think of seemed too implausible. So I went with the least plausible of them all. The truth. "I haven't been sleeping," I said. "I went for a drive. Flipped a coin." I ended with a pause, looking nervously around to see the men's bafflement. But to my surprise, they nodded instead, as if they understood completely, as if no other answer would have made sense. I had not shocked them, apparently. "Say no more," said Jack wistfully. "Insomnia is a cruel mistress, and one that every man here has served at one time or another. It's what's brought us all together, actually. You could say it's the driving force behind our informal association." I was a little surprised to hear this. Had I stumbled upon some sort of support group for Insomniacs? At 3 in the morning, around a campfire in a dried-up old canal, I asked them slowly. "None of you can sleep either. That's why you're all here." The men fell silent. They looked at their feet. After a tense moment, Jack replied delicately. "Well, at first, that was certainly the case. Every one of us sat around this fire the first time because we were hounded by insomnia, a prisoner to that endless night. But over time and together, we have conquered that affliction." He repeated once more for emphasis. "Together." I looked around the circle at my fellow Insomniacs. Though they avoided looking directly at me for some reason, I could still see it in their eyes. A sort of haunted, hollow look. A wariness that never quite goes away, no matter how much you have slept. A look that betrays a man acquainted with all of the darkest chambers of his own psyche. Yes, there was no doubt about it. These men suffered from the plague of sleeplessness, or at least they once had. For I knew that look all too well. I saw it on my face every time I looked in the mirror. After a long silence, I asked the question that they must have known was coming, but for some unknown reason, I was hesitant to speak aloud. "Can you help me then?" The men bristled, as if a nasty wind had blown through them. But it was not that they were offended at my question. Their reaction was quite the opposite, I think. Like a wolf that smells a lamb's blood from miles away, they shifted in their seats and exchanged enigmatic glances with one another. Jack spoke once more, and when he did, his voice dripped like poisoned honey. "Your cure is here for the taking, my friend. The only question is, will you take it?" I looked around the circle of men, their eyes now lit with the glow of some other, greater fire. They were all men, in case I didn't say before. Sad, lonesome men. Fat, unkempt, thin-haired, their clothes torn and tattered, their faces pale and creased. Forgotten men, miserable men, living for nothing, not even themselves. And yet, here they all were. Here I was. Unlike myself, though, there was something else at work inside of these men. Something frightening and brilliant. I could see it in the way they stared without blinking, the way they seemed to look through me. They didn't speak, but I swore that I could hear voices in my head. "Come with us," they said in whispers, thin as spider silk. "Walk with us to the places you cannot see. Down streets with no end. Seek what we have sought. Find what we have found. Eat at our table. Join us in our long sleep." A strange tingle traveled from my fingertips to the top of my scalp, hot and cold at the same time. A voice answered Jack that sounded like my own, but the words seemed to come from somewhere far away. I will take it. I looked down at the still steaming mug in my hands and asked myself, for the first time, what am I drinking? The answer seemed to please the men. They relaxed their tensed-up muscles, regained their smiles. Jack rose to his feet and held his hand out to mine. He was so much taller than he had first appeared, his arms like tree trunks, his face a colossal effigy carved into stark and morbid angles by the moonlight. It wasn't just him, though. All of the men were transforming, expanding, limbs stretching like taffy, faces ballooning into giant, misshapen masks, eyes the size of dinner plates, teeth like a wall of skulls in an ancient catacomb. Jack took my hand in his. I was puny in his grip, like a lifeless marionette, a fragile toy that he could smash against the wall if he so chose. But he was gentle with me, brought me to my feet and set me alongside the other men, who all began to stand as well. Even as they got to their feet, they continued to transform. Their skin rippled and unfurled past the limits of their former bodies, bones stitching together out of nothing to fill out the new tapestries of flesh. I tried to watch the process closely, but I found it difficult to focus on only one body for very long. Ruptures began to appear in the new folds of skin the longer that I looked. Eyes dissolved into faces. New orifices sprouted beneath fingernails. Eventually, I just shut my eyes, afraid the bodies would unravel completely if I kept watching any longer. And amidst this catastrophe of flesh, the world itself began to disjoin. Wind swept in from all around us, lifting the debris off the canal floor. The fish bones, the discarded bottles and cans, the remains of old campfires, all swirled around us in a hurricane of refuse. I could barely make out the night beyond the storm. The hair on my arms prickled up, lightning ready. I felt a metallic tingle on my tongue and tasted sweet, iron-scented blood. Above me, the moon blinked, momentarily scarlet, and then it vanished. Even battered by the winds, Jack stood as sturdy as an oak. His eyes were serious, meant business. With swooping gestures, he conducted the other men. 3 of them gathered around the sheet-covered lump that I had noticed earlier. The others formed a wide circle around those 3, joined hands and shut their eyes. I was slightly surprised to find that I had joined them. I felt iron-strong hands gripping me on both sides, and yet, still not completely lost to their control, I kept my eyes open. I wanted to see what we were being shown. Satisfied with our clockwork obedience, Jack began to spin around us, almost in time with the storm, shouting against the wind. He spoke in no language that I had ever heard. Words old like fossils, coated in horrible double and triple meanings. I couldn't understand them, per se, but they nevertheless conjured visions in my mind of hideous, grasping things at the edges of my sanity, of dark pacts made by sleepless madmen with ancient gods, of a ritual, centuries old, which I had chanced upon by the flipping of a coin. To this last thought, the spiderweb chorus of the other men once again responded in my mind, mockingly. Chance? You think you were brought here by chance? Oh, little one, there is so much more that you still do not see. And if on cue, in response to another gesture from Jack, the 3 men around the mysterious pile lifted the sheet, released it to the wind, let it fly through the air and join the storm. The Sheepbearers leapt immediately into the circle, their eyes shut the entire time. I looked around me at the men now chanting back the words that Jack had supplied to them. My own lips moved in time with theirs, the syllables on my lips at once unknowable and familiar. And yet still, I did not close my eyes. so that only Jack and I saw who was underneath the sheet. The victim's body, fat and plump and milky white, stood out grotesquely against the darkness all around us, like a raw, wet chicken carcass floating in a pool of crab. A thick cord bound his hands and feet, but other than that, he was completely exposed. Naked and shivering despite the warmth of the fire. Exposed to us now, he began to cry out, his pathetic simpering at odds with Jack's tone of grandeur. It was hard to make him out through the storm, but I did catch some snatches of what he was saying. "Help! Sweet Jesus, I have children! Why?" I wanted to move to help him. You have to believe me about that. I wanted to break the circle, knock down Jack and untie the cords from the man, run home and call the police, or else just forget that I ever saw anything. But I didn't. I stood still, unable to move a muscle. Maybe I was paralyzed, maybe just cowardly, or most horrible of all, maybe I was curious. Whatever it was, all I could do was watch. I watched as Jack himself lost control. A slight twinge of fear playing in his eyes as his lips stopped moving but his voice kept going. Watched as the wind lifted the naked, struggling victim into the air, towards the place where the absent moon was lurking. Watched as a seam in the darkness tore, and they arrived in the places that they had been hiding, between the cracks of distant starlight. They came, carried by wings tattered and bloodstained, their voices high like shattering glass, their faces empty of every feature save an endless, gaping mouth. Even Jack had shut his eyes in fear when they came. Next to him, even his now monstrous body was dwarfed. I don't know how many of them there were. Maybe 1,000,000, maybe just one. Moving so rapidly, it multiplied in my sight. I think my eyes were never meant to look at such things, and what I saw was just an approximation of something hideous and incomprehensible beyond imagination. Approximation or not, it was enough to annihilate my last dredges of belief in the order of the universe, the victory of light against dark, order against chaos. I knew then that the hallucinations that I had been struggling to outrun that night were nothing more than a shadow cast by the true horrors of existence. The words I record here can never be more than an echo of that profound and shattering moment, but still, they are all that I can offer. The last thread of my sanity allows me to share nothing more or less than this. The victim hung in space, screaming mutely. The ones that had come had no eyes, but somehow they regarded him. Coldly measured his worth as a meal. Noiseless words passed between them, and they seemed to come to an agreement. He will do. When they finally came for him, they were fast, brutal, and bloodless. A precise scissor cut through the necks of paper dolls. A dampened fingertip squeezing out a candle. They swooped towards him through the night, entered through his mouth, and cascaded out of his eyes in the next instant. It took them no time at all to find what they had come for. As quickly as they had come, they vanished once more, back to their hellish nest on the other side of creation. Back to that world which I now know lies just beyond this one, and always has. For a brief moment before they parted, the air around me shimmered, and I could tell you that I saw that world. The edges of my vision blurred, and briefly for less than a second, I swear, I grasped just how thin the curtain of our reality was. The secrets that lurked behind it were so much greater, shined so much brighter, screamed so much louder. And then it was gone. The moon blinked back into the sky once more, and the night was still. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The victim, now lifeless, lay on the ground in front of us. His body showed no outward signs of his trials, no wounds or scars, but he wasn't screaming anymore. His eyes were gray and vacant. There was no one at home. Jack, now fully in control once more, looked around as all the other men slowly opened their eyes. We were all back to our normal size now. The excesses of mere moments ago felt worlds away. I felt the cold night air on the back of my neck, and I wiggled my toes. I could move once more, on my own accord. If I wanted to, I could run home, fast as my legs would carry me. Run far away from the horrors that I'd chanced upon. At least I told myself that I could run away. In reality, I stayed still, waited tensely for the next moment. Jack stepped towards the body slowly and bent down to him. He lifted up one of his pale fat arms and dropped it limply back to the ground where it landed, with a sickening plop. He nodded, seemingly satisfied, and then looked back up at us. Fire burning brightly in the wells of his eyes beckoned us towards him. He snapped his fingers and spoke a single word. Feed. The men advanced gently, rhythmically. When each one reached to grab his piece, there was no fighting over portions or haggling over the prize cuts. There was nothing uncivilized about the meal, is what I mean. They were all well-mannered, deliberate, courteous even, helping each other to snap off a bit of tendon, tear loose a chunk of fat, break the skull to get at the best bits. Blood pooled around the body, lapped at their feet, and some inevitably got it on their fingers, but they were not messy. They chewed before they swallowed, lingered over each morsel, savored the tastes and textures. It was a remarkably tasteful spectacle. Only Jack did not join in the meal, instead walking over to where I stood, some distance from the rest. He put a jovial arm around my shoulder, exactly as if we had just won a soccer match. It can be an awful lot to take in the first time, I know, he said. His voice was so considerate and understanding that I could harbor no resentment towards him, despite my best efforts. He went on. But you wouldn't have come here tonight unless you were ready. That's just not how it works. So, take your time, and when you are ready, well, the boys won't touch your portion, I promise. He clapped my back and walked behind me into the darkness. I turned around before he could disappear completely though. Wait, Jack! I called out and he paused. I chose my words carefully, wrestling with my question in my mind. Finally, I asked him, Do you sleep better now? After all of this? He turned around to face me, and I swear I'll never forget the look in his eyes. I can sleep now if I choose to. Wherever I am, I can close my eyes and swim in an ocean of sweet darkness. You will be able to also, if you so choose. Once he had spoken these words, he was gone. No more than a shadow among shadows. I gazed into the blackness beyond the fire's reach, but saw nothing. And so I turned back, towards the victim and the other men. They were finishing up. He was little more than bones now, but I saw that there was still some meat, enough for a single portion. I closed my eyes, breathed in deeply, and made my choice. Here I am now, a week later, and everything has changed. For 5 nights in a row, I've slept uninterrupted. No tossing and turning, no midnight bouts of sleep paralysis, no nightmares, no dreams at all in fact. Just like Jack said, I close my eyes and sleep is there, It waits for me like an old friend, cradling me in its tender, empty embrace until morning. I wake up totally refreshed, hungry to consume the daylight. I've been exercising, meeting friends, even thinking about going back to school. Everyone tells me, it's like you're a different person. If only they were right. If only the man who woke up in the mornings was some new person. Someone who had not witnessed the horror of that night. Someone who could forget the things that creep just out of sight. The things that are always watching and ever hungry. If only that man had died that night, and some new, virginal body, blessed with the gift of easy sleep, had taken his place. Never mind that though. It's pointless to ruminate on these things. I made my choice, and I did so entirely on my own accord. There is no difference between myself and every other man who had walked the sleepless streets before me. We have all found the same place, because ultimately, it was the place that we were looking for, even if we did not know it. At first, I tried to deny this, but it was no use. I got nothing more or less than what I had asked for. So did Jack. So did Cornelius. So did all of us. I am part of them now, and there is no turning back. Last night, I stayed up a little late, compelled by some unknown force to take another late drive. Soon, without even realizing it, I found myself turning down familiar streets. It was as if some other driver had taken the wheel, and I was his passenger. I turned back before I could reach my destination, but tonight, I think I'm going to drive again. The moon is bright red, and earlier I could have sworn I saw it disappear for a moment. I am being called and there's no use in resisting. Why would I even want to? I have a journey now, shortly to go. My master calls me. I must not say no. King Lear, Act 5, Scene 3.